ॐ भद्रं कर्णेभिः शृणुयाम देवाः ॐ
Okay,
भद्रं
so
कर्णेभिः
in this first
शृणुयाम
segment, I'd like to
देवाः
go over some kind of
भद्रं
basic fundamental facts and details
पश्येमाक्षभिर्यजत्राः
about that old shop in the mall that we're calling Vedic culture. Now,
स्तुष्टुवांसस्तनूर्ध्वश्रेमदेवहितं
remember those
यदायुः
so-called Aryans who we talked about last time?
स्वस्तिभिर्यजत्राः
Well, according to most scholars, the lifestyle of those Aryans,
यज्ञोषधीष्टुवद्भिर्यजत्राः
whoever they might have been, is reflected in a very ancient set of texts composed in the language of Sanskrit and called the Vedas. This Vedic culture lasted for roughly 1,000 years, from 1500 BC all the way to 500 BC. Now, if you remember what happened with the IVC was that we found a lot of stuff from the ground, but we still can't read the texts. In the case of Vedic culture, it's kind of the opposite. We just about everything we know about the Vedic culture comes from texts, but there's not a lot of stuff we're getting out of the ground. The texts are the Vedas, which is a Sanskrit word that basically means knowledge. The word Veda has over time come to mean a specific kind of knowledge, a sacred, ineffable kind of knowledge that allows its knowers, the Vedic Brahmins, to do sort of superhuman things. The Vedic people recognize different gods and demons and other supernatural beings, but if there's kind of one core fundamental belief that characterizes Vedic thought, it's this. There exists a sacred force called Brahman that empowers the universe. It's there in everything around us, things we can perceive, and it's there in things we can't perceive. It's a force that allows you to manipulate the universe, to keep things in order, to achieve great things. This Brahman can be harnessed in two different ways. One, through a special kind of speech, which is called vach in Sanskrit, and two, through sacrificial rituals called yajnas. Vach can be just ordinary speech, actually, like it is if you're talking or if I'm talking. But a properly trained priest can produce a different kind of speech, a supercharged speech called a mantra that's thought to be infused with that same Brahman that empowers and animates the whole universe. So if a priest can recite a Vedic mantra properly, with no mistakes at all, the idea is that he can access the larger, more powerful forces of the universe. He can make sure that the rains come on time, that demonic forces are kept at bay, that people have health, long life, good cattle, lots of offspring. Vedic priests could access this power not just through these mantras, through speech, but also through their actions, which are called karma. Like Brahman and mantra, this is a very important word that we're going to see over and over again. Karma is the oldest and most basic, in its oldest and most basic meaning, just means action. Anything you do physically, whether it's to move something like throw a ball, doing the dishes, eating, hurting, killing. All of these are actions, they're karmas. Just as with speech, there's an idea that in the Veda, there are special kinds of actions, ritual actions that priests do that are radically different from the ordinary actions that we do. Our ordinary actions are done usually out of some kind of emotional impulse, desire, or fear, or anger, or whatever. Ritual actions are those that are done in a carefully prescribed, deliberate way, and they're sacrificial acts. They're done for a higher purpose than just your own immediate desires or emotions. In Sanskrit, this kind of act, this kind of karma, is called a yajna, or a sacrificial ritual. And like the Vedic mantra, the sacrificial ritual works because it's able to harness that sacred energy of Brahman. So in Vedic religion, these mantras and yajnas are the two ways that ordinary humans can access the supercharging energy of Brahman in order to manipulate and control larger cosmic forces. Of course, it's not just any ordinary folk who can do it, but only specially gifted and trained people who could access this Brahman. The people who could do this were known as the Brahmins. Note, this is kind of a confusing thing. In English, the spelling looks the same. In the course, however, what I'll be doing is putting that word for the force, Brahman, in italics, using a lowercase b. The other one, Brahman, with a capital B, is a class or a group of individuals who had the ability to access this Brahman and use it to ensure the health, wealth, and prosperity, both of themselves and their clients, people who hired them to do the rituals. These clients were the other two classes of early Vedic society, the Kshatriyas, who were the protectors and the leaders of the Vedic tribal communities, and also the Vaishyas, who would have been the ordinary folks in the community. We'll talk about these divisions and how they later turned into the idea of caste. That'll be another stop in our train ride. But for now, let's just keep in mind that Brahmins, with a capital B, were like priestly types of people who could use the mantras and the yajnas to harness that supernatural force called Brahman with a small b. Got that? Great. The Vedas now were the texts that contain the Brahmins' collective knowledge about all the different mantras that they can use and all the different rituals that they can perform. And so anyone who would later want to become a Vedic expert first needed to be trained in these Vedas. They had to learn the Vedas by heart and recite them with no mistakes so that they could properly harness this Brahman force. Now, before we jump into the Vedas kind of whole hog, let me talk a little bit about how these ancient Vedic people saw their world, their worldview, and what it might have meant to them to harness this sacred power in their world, the sacred Vedic power. Now, for one, they saw the universe as being tripartite. At the base, there was the Bhuhu, the earth. It was populated by humans, animals, other living creatures. Above us was the sky, the Bhuvas, where we can see the clouds, the sun, the moon. Sometimes we also see birds, right, who fly up, just like our mantras, and they can fly up to the heavens, was the idea. At the very top, above the highest firmament of the sky, lies the heavens, the Swaha, where the gods and our departed ancestors reside. It's invisible to us, you can't see it, except when the sun disappears at night, then we can see a whole bunch of little tiny access points to the heavens that we call stars. In that world that looked like that, one important task for us humans down here on Earth was to provide for those who dwelled up there in heaven the two things that they kind of miss from the earth, the two things they need for their sustenance. One, plenty of good food, and it was both veg and non-veg, and two, a special drink called soma. Now, we don't exactly know what this soma was, but as we'll see, we do know a bit about what it does, and it feels like it had a kind of exhilarating, energizing, stimulating effect on its drinkers. The gods needed soma to defeat their enemies, who were called the demons or the asuras. The Vedic seers, the rishis, used soma for poetic inspiration in order to visualize the mantras that they articulated in words. In this worldview, there were two pathways that connect earth to heaven. First, fire was the only thing that the Vedic people possessed that could get directly to heaven. Fire burned, and the heat and the smoke rose all the way up to the top of the firmament. The Sanskrit word for fire is Agni, and this Agni was both the fire itself, the physical fire, and the god of fire. And it's always present in a Vedic ritual. Agni, by the way, is cognate with the Latin igneus, which comes into English words like ignite, ignition, and so on. The other thing that could go all the way up to heaven are the Vedic mantras, because it's this kind of speech that's specially infused with the force of Brahman that allows it to move that way. So the basic form of a Vedic sacrificial rite would be that there would be a fire, Agni, which would transport offerings of food and soma to the gods and to our ancestors. At the same time, Vedic priests would be praising and honoring these gods and ancestors using special Vedic mantras that would also travel to heaven. This meant that there were no permanent images, by the way, of gods, or altars or temples where they could be worshipped, since the fire itself was the only physical representation of the divine on earth. Instead, each time that a Vedic ritual was to be conducted, a space has to be purified and properly consecrated where this yajna, this sacrificial ritual, could take place. Okay, so now that we have a kind of a better idea maybe of what Vedic culture was like, we'll take a little break here. When we come back, let's take a kind of wide angle view of how this culture developed and changed over like 1,000 years of ancient Indian history.
Madhava, Jai Jai.